Chapter 4: The Contract That Changes Everything. I woke up to a room that was too quiet. The silence of the Blackwood Tower penthouse wasn't the peaceful silence of the countryside. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of deep water. I lay still for a moment, staring up at the ceiling. The guest suite was larger than my entire apartment. The sheets were a thread count so high they felt like liquid against my skin, and the air was perfectly climate-controlled to a crisp 68 degrees. Then, the memories of the previous night rushed back. The gala. The rain. The car, the contract. I sat up abruptly, my heart thudding. I looked at the bedside table. There was a glass of water and a small, silver tablet with a note, 8 a.m., my office. It was 7:15 a.m. I threw back the duvet and stood up, my bare feet sinking into a rug that felt like walking on a cloud. I walked over to the massive walk-in closet Alexander had mentioned. When I pulled the doors open, I gasped. It wasn't just some clothes. It was a curated wardrobe. Rows of tailored trousers, silk blouses in muted earth tones, pencil skirts that looked like they were molded for a goddess, and a line of heels that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. He hadn't just bought me clothes, he had bought a version of me. A Maya Sterling that fit into his world. A Maya Sterling that looked like she belonged to Alexander Blackwood. I felt a surge of indignation, but it was quickly dampened by the reality of my situation. I couldn't exactly do business in the ripped jeans and coffee-stained hoodie I'd left at my apartment. I reached for a charcoal gray pencil skirt and a cream silk blouse. As I dressed, I caught my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The clothes fit perfectly, disturbingly perfectly. He knew my measurements. He knew my style better than I did. Every button I fastened felt like another stitch in the net he'd cast over me. I brushed my hair, applied a minimal amount of makeup, and stepped out into the main living area. The penthouse looked different in the morning light. The sun bounced off the glass and steel of the surrounding skyscrapers, filling the room with a brilliant, cold clarity. Alexander was already at the obsidian desk, his back to me. He was wearing a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and he was focused on 3 different monitors at once. He didn't turn around, but I knew he heard me. "You're 5 minutes early," he said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to travel through the floorboards and up into my heels. "I don't like to be kept waiting," I replied, crossing the room to stand behind him. "And I imagine you don't either." He turned his chair then. He looked tired, but in a way that made him look even more dangerous. His hair was slightly mussed, and there was a shadow of stubble on his jaw. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on the way the skirt hugged my hips. "The clothes fit," he noted. It wasn't a question. "How did you get my sizes, Alexander?" "I have people who specialize in details. I don't like guesswork." He stood up, towering over me. The power he radiated was even more intense in the morning light. "Coffee is in the kitchen. Drink it. We have a lot to cover." I followed him into the kitchen, which was a marvel of stainless steel and marble. A high-end espresso machine was already hissing. He poured a cup of black coffee and handed it to me. "The contract," he began, leaning against the counter, crossing his ankles. "You signed it. It's been filed. The funds for your father's medical facility have already been transferred. He's being moved to the Blackwood Pavilion as we speak." A wave of relief washed over me, so strong I had to set my coffee down before I spilled it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said sharply. "It's a transaction. You gave me your freedom for 6 months. I gave you your father's life. We are even." The coldness of his tone stung. I had to remind myself that this man wasn't a savior. He was a shark. "So, What is my first duty as your assistant? I asked, putting as much venom into the word assistant as possible. Alexander stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face before his fingers caught the collar of my silk blouse. He straightened it with slow, agonizing precision, his knuckles brushing the sensitive skin of my throat. Your first duty is to understand that I am the only person you answer to, he whispered. You don't talk to the press. You don't talk to your old friends. You don't leave this building without my express permission or my security detail. You are locked in, Maya, literally and figuratively. And the work, I managed to say, my breath hitching as his thumb traced the line of my jaw. The work is upstairs, in the private lab. He dropped his hand, the loss of contact leaving a cold patch on my skin. The Sterling IP is fractured. I need you to walk my engineers through the source code. But before that, I need you to organize the physical files. Everything your father didn't digitize. He pointed to a stack of boxes in the corner of the living room that I hadn't noticed before. They were the boxes from my father's old office. You brought my father's things here. I had them moved last night while you were sleeping. I felt a chill. He had moved into my life so fast I hadn't even had time to blink. You don't waste time, do you? Time is the only thing I can't buy more of, he said, walking back toward his desk. Get to work, Maya. I have a board meeting in an hour. When I get back, I want a full summary of the 2018 mapping project. I spent the next 4 hours on the floor, surrounded by my father's life. It was heartbreaking. These were his notes, his scribbles in the margins of research papers, his dreams. Alexander had turned them into a transaction, but to me they were holy. Around noon, the elevator chimed. I expected Alexander, but instead it was a woman in a sharp suit, his head of security, I presumed. Miss Sterling, Mr. Blackwood has requested you join him for lunch in the executive dining room at the office. The car is waiting downstairs. He said I couldn't leave the building, I said, standing up and brushing the dust off my skirt. You're leaving with his permission, she corrected, and with me. Alexander POV. I sat at the head of the mahogany table in the Blackwood Industries boardroom, listening to my CFO drone on about quarterly projections. My mind, however, was 40 floors up. I kept seeing Maya in that gray skirt. I had spent the morning trying to focus on the merger with the Japanese firm, but the image of her sitting on the floor of my penthouse, her hair falling over her face as she looked through those boxes, kept intruding. She looked so small among all that paper, so fragile yet so stubbornly resilient. I had told myself this was about the IP. I had told myself I needed her for the code. But as I watched the clock, counting down the minutes until lunch, I had to admit the truth. I wanted her in my building. I wanted her in my sight. I wanted to see the look on my competitors' faces when I walked in with the woman who had dared to challenge me at the gala. The boardroom doors opened, and my heart did a strange, uncomfortable kick. Maya walked in. She looked different than she had an hour ago. She had pulled her hair back into a sleek bun, and she carried a leather portfolio like a shield. She looked professional, polished, and utterly beautiful. The room went silent. My board of directors, men who had spent their lives perfecting the art of the poker face, all stared. Gentlemen, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. This is Maya Sterling. She is my new senior advisor on the Horizon project. I saw the flicker of surprise in Maya's eyes. I hadn't told her the title. I'd called her an assistant this morning just to see her reaction, but in front of the world, she was a weapon I was unveiling. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chair at my right hand. the seat usually reserved for Marcus or my most senior counsel. She sat, her movements graceful. I could smell the jasmine again. It filled the sterile, air-conditioned room, making everything else seem dull by comparison. Mr. Blackwood, one of the older board members, a man named Henderson who had always been a thorn in my side, spoke up. I thought the sterling acquisition was finalized. Why do we need an advisor? Because the acquisition was the body, I said, looking Henderson dead in the eye. Miss Sterling is the soul. She knows things about this technology that aren't on any server. And since I intend for Horizon to be the most successful launch in this company's history, I want the soul under my roof. I felt Maya's gaze on me. It was heavy, questioning. We're done for the morning, I announced, standing up. Lunch is served in the dining room. Miss Sterling and I will be dining privately. I didn't wait for their response. I placed a hand on the small of Maya's back, guiding her toward the private dining area. Through the thin silk of her blouse, I could feel the warmth of her skin. She didn't pull away, but I felt the tension in her muscles. Once the doors were closed and we were alone in the smaller, more intimate dining room, she turned on me. "Senior advisor," she whispered. "Is that what this is? A promotion?" "It's a position of power, Maya, one you should use." I pulled out a chair for her. "I don't hire assistants to do the kind of work you're capable of. I want you at my side in these meetings. I want them to see that you are part of the Blackwood machine now." "Or you just want to show off your new acquisition," she countered, her eyes flashing. I leaned in, my face inches from hers. The scent of the expensive wine on the table mixed with her perfume. "Maybe I do. You're a very valuable asset, Maya. Why wouldn't I want to show you off?" "I'm not an asset, Alexander. I'm a human being. In this building, everyone is an asset, including me." I reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold. I rubbed my thumb over her knuckles, watching the way her pupils dilated. "The contract gives me your time, but it's up to you to decide how you spend it. You can be the woman who hides in the guest room, or you can be the woman who helps me change the world." She looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me. "And what do you get out of it, besides the technology?" I felt a sudden, sharp pang of desire, so intense it was almost painful. I wanted to pull her out of that chair and onto the table. I wanted to see that sleek bun come undone. I wanted to hear her say my name when she wasn't angry. "I get to see if you're as fearless as you think you are," I said, my voice dropping to a low, intimate rasp. I let go of her hand and sat down opposite her, picking up my napkin. "Now, tell me about the 2018 mapping project. I want to know why your father stopped the trial." Maya POV. Lunch was a battlefield. For an hour, we sparred, not with insults, but with data. Alexander was brilliant, I couldn't deny it. He understood the nuances of my father's work better than any of the sharks he'd hired. He pushed me, questioned my logic, and demanded more than I thought I had to give. But through it all, there was a secondary conversation happening. It was in the way his eyes never left mine. It was in the way he tilted his head when I spoke. It was in the way the air between us seemed to vibrate every time our hands came near each other across the table. He was testing me, yes, but he was also courting me in the most arrogant, billionaire way possible. He was trying to seduce my mind before he ever touched my body. And the worst part, it was working. By the time we returned to the penthouse late that evening, I was exhausted. The mental strain of keeping up with Alexander, combined with the emotional weight of seeing my father's notes, had drained me. "Go to bed, Maya," Alexander said as we stepped out of the elevator. He looked as fresh as he had at 8 in the morning. "We leave for DC tomorrow at 6 a.m. I have a meeting with the FDA. DC, I asked, stopping in my tracks. That wasn't in The contract says you travel where I travel, he reminded me, his voice soft but firm. My jet leaves from Teterboro, be ready. He started to walk toward his room, then paused. He turned back and looked at me, the shadows of the evening stretching across the floor. Maya. Yes. You did well today. Henderson is terrified of you. Don't lose that edge. He disappeared into his room, and I heard the click of the lock. I stood in the middle of the dark living room, the city lights twinkling through the glass. I was an advisor. I was a traveler. I was a weapon. I walked to the coffee table where the contract still sat. I picked it up and looked at my signature. Locked in. I felt a thrill of fear, but underneath it, a spark of something else, something dangerous. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a player in a very high-stakes game. I just had to make sure I didn't forget that in Alexander Blackwood's game, the house always wins. I went to my room, stripped off the expensive clothes he'd bought me, and climbed into the large, empty bed. As I drifted off to sleep, I could still feel the phantom pressure of his knuckles against my throat. The contract had changed everything. I wasn't just saving my father anymore. I was discovering who I was in the dark. Alexander POV. I stood by the window of my bedroom, watching the reflection of the city in the glass. I should have been sleeping. I had a grueling day ahead of me, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way Maya had looked in the boardroom. She had been like a diamond, hard, bright, and capable of cutting through anything. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small piece of paper she had dropped at the gala. It was crumpled now, the yellow highlighting faded. I had told her that everyone chooses survival over pride. But as I looked at her handwriting on the contract, bold, defiant, and beautiful, I realized I had lied to her. I didn't want her to survive. I wanted her to thrive. I wanted to see what she could become when she had the full weight of my empire behind her. And I wanted to be the only one who got to see the woman behind the senior advisor mask. I walked to my bed and lay down, the silence of the penthouse finally feeling like a weight. For the first time in my life, the power didn't feel like enough. I wanted more. I wanted her. And according to the contract, I had 6 months to make sure she never wanted to leave.